Chapter 21, Step 9. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. In Step 8, we became aware of what impact our actions had on those around us. We gained insight into our victim, controller, and isolator character defects, and what harm it had done to others and ourselves. This new awareness transported us from a place of being stuck to a place of transition in ourselves and in our relationships with others. Now in Step 9, we take action in making amends to attempt to heal the wounds we caused by our character defects. This new awareness transported us from a place of being stuck to a place of transition in ourselves and in our relationships with others. Now in Step 9, we take action in making amends to attempt to heal the wounds we caused by our character defects. We are faced with fear usually in the first few steps of embarking on this effort. We have made tremendous and miraculous changes as a result of the work we have done before this. The work that we have done previously has set the stage for our actions in Step 9. In Step 4 and 5, we took a comprehensive look at our lives and shared everything with one human being. In Steps 6 and 7, we halted the destructive path of our character defects and opened the doorway to unconditional relationships with others. This paves the way of working skills of practicing humility in our relationships with others. We now approach our actions of working Step 9 with the spiritual principles we have learned. In working the steps, we have found humility, honesty, and sincerity. We are at this phase in our recovery to make direct amends. Not because we are told to, but because we see in our hearts that our obligation to make things right is at hand. We approach this step in the beginning of each amends with asking for guidance and strength from our loving God in how He may portray Himself in our lives. Remember, the first words in the first step is we, having at our disposal sponsors, counselor, and others in 12-step recovery. We work on each amends individually so that we may prepare for taking action in the step. Bouncing off what our plans of amends are to our mentors in recovery, we will find encouragement and guidance. It is important to use someone else's judgment in monitoring our progress here because we lose perspective. We don't realize that by sharing the information, we could hurt others in the process. For instance, I've seen men jump into talking with their wives about a short affair that they had because they thought it would help them build trust and honesty into their marital relationships. It often had the reverse effect. Many times when a spouse is confronted with their partner's improprieties, the spouse asks details in an attempt to develop some sense of control of the situation. While the person confessing might not see the situation as so bad because it happened several years ago, the spouse is feeling the impact as if it just happened. The partner, feeling that providing the details is necessary to relieve themselves of the guilt, does so. But that only causes further trauma for the spouse. I am not here to recommend any specific or standard method of determining amends should be direct or indirect. I only suggest the recovering individual get specific feedback from a counselor or sponsor who knows the situation and them. Weighing out the best method to lessen the impact on the receiver should be considered. The avenue of making amends may require being in counseling with a partner to build credibility about their sincerity to change. Then perhaps it would be possible to make amends with supervision of a counselor or sponsor to assist. Then perhaps it would be possible to make those amends with supervision with a counselor or sponsor to assist in damage control. An indirect amends may be showing appreciation for their partner, and obviously stopping the behavior that you are making amends for. In some cases, ending the relationship where the wreckage has been unresolvable may be the appropriate amends, so as not to continue to cause harm to them. This process should be followed through with all amends we are about to make. Making amends to those we have resentments towards eases the energy we give these relationships which are destructive to us. Many of us have been stuck behind our resentments, feeling like we are in a prison with no freedom from the conflict. We may feel conflicted or tormented by the issue in our own heads, but they may not be affected at all. The purpose is to evict the resentment from our heads where we have been giving it free rent. Taking the power away from these relationships will help us balance out our personal lives. We tend to place unrealistic, rigid expectations on those we harbor resentments towards. The more power we give them, the less human they become in our minds. We may begin to demonize them, which leaves those relationships unresolvable. We need to take time out and imagine them being loved and cared for by another person. Imagine them being hugged by a loved one, or having a warm evening with family members next to the Christmas tree on Christmas Day. We may pray for them that they receive all the things we would like for ourselves. By talking with your sponsor, counselor, or others in 12-step recovery, you might find a method of approaching your 9-step work. It may involve a third party mediate this situation, or if you feel comfortable enough without fear of retaliation, approaching them by yourself. Some people we have resentments towards are unavailable possibly because of being deceased, or it is not safe or appropriate for us to have direct contact. Yes, it is our perception that these individuals hurt us in some way, and that has turned into a resentment. In some cases, our resentments were instilled by our self-centeredness. In discussing the matter with others, we may recognize it being about us, not them. There are some resentments we may find no resolution to, no matter who we talk with. In these circumstances, turning our resentment over to a higher power will offer us detachment from our resentment. That particular resentment could resurface, but using this method will keep it at bay. Often resentments leave a person feeling that something has been taken from them. I have suggested to someone suffering like this to change their thoughts and get into the present. They may do this by reading a daily meditation book, making a simple prayer or a gratitude list, or something else. We have grown accustomed to thinking, I am scarred because of the abusive childhood and nothing good will come of it. Change this to, I'm in recovery, list several assets here, and abundance and prosperity will fill my life today. The opportunity for new insights and awareness will come to me through my relationships with others. Say this until you believe it at least a few times a day. Sometimes I have to change my thinking to change how I feel. We have the need to make amends to others who have also harmed us. We must set aside our resentments and focus on the task at hand. We must approach these amends with assistance, so as not to react and end up in a verbal conflict with them. We talk with our sponsors and mentors in recovery about our intentions and what we intend to say. Even though we may have been hurt by this person, we are responsible at this time for being accountable for our actions. Remaining objective is a task at hand while in our amends process with them. We must separate our hurt feelings and go into this objectively. If we are not prepared to do this, it would be better to put it off until we've done further work on ourselves. The benefit of this amends is to take your energy back from this relationship so that you may use it in a more constructive way in your life. By sitting down with them, our honesty might bring out warmth in them that we didn't expect. It may take time for this effort to work. Those feelings take time to resolve. If we have made our best effort and shook their hands walking away, we have started the process of change. Amends serves as a learning process for people in recovery. This step is not just to heal their relationships, but to prepare them to digest what impact their actions actually had on others. Not until a person has walked in the footsteps of the one they harmed can a person truly learn from their experience. Not until a person has walked in the footsteps of the one they had harmed can a person truly learn from the experience. We listen to the impact that our behavior had on the loved ones or the person they affected. Making a face-to-face amends, when appropriate, can be a healthy and deeply healing part of recovery. But it cannot be done haphazardly. Ask to schedule a sit-down with the person. Listen and respect their wishes if they tell you that they're not emotionally ready for that interaction in their life. Perhaps they will say that they will never be ready, and that must also be respected. If, however, the injured party has set up a time to discuss the amends with you, Ask them where they would like to meet. This is your amends, but it is the injured party who needs to feel comfortable at this time. But it is the injured party who needs to feel as comfortable as possible. You may start out the conversation how long you've been in recovery, and you must show sincerity. Make sure that you have in memory what you want to say. Discussing your behavior with the person and asking them how it affected them is part of the amends. Listen to the injured person's experience without interruption or justification. Apologize and then leave in a comfortable fashion. This all helps to get closure for ourselves. It may give us the ability to continue with the relationship. We now have a different outlook on the experience for ourselves. We may or may not have been able to affect the perception or depth of the pain experienced by the person we hurt, but we have made the effort. Pain does not end by my time clock. It must heal in a way that the injured party can accept on his or her own. Making amends will take time and lots of thought. Be aware that we have no way of knowing how people will react to our amends. Some may walk away being upset or angry. Each person we have affected has their own way of dealing with the amends. We may have humbly asked forgiveness from the other party, and it was not recognized, and if it was not acknowledged, we must go on at this point realizing that we did the best we could. There are those in our lives who have been closest to us that probably have been hurt the most by our actions. In some cases, there is no complete amends that can be made, an example being from a childhood loss because of the parent's addiction, or a death of someone due to our actions, or negligence due to our addictions. There are many of us that will live with the guilt that no human being can relieve. In that case, we turn to our higher power, a loving God of our understanding, to help us to find forgiveness. There are those things in my life that I live with that I am aware I cannot undo. My strength for change has come from those lessons, and has kept me teachable in my life and recovery. Many of us have taken the pain of addictions and turned it into hope, unbridled dedication to helping others in recovery. We have turned the outcome over to our higher power and give our best shot at making amends. Just select the people of circumstances that seem to have had the biggest priority in your mind. Get through one amends at a time. If we examine our motives before making the amends and find that we are truly sincere and are willing to make restitution for the damage we have done, then we are ready. You can access Step 9 worksheet at www.treatmentguide4u.com. That's www.treatmentguide4u.com. Use your 8th step list and make a journal, filling in now where you left it blank for the 9th step. Write down what the people you made amends to told you about the impact they saw your behavior having on them. The purpose of this is to reinforce your self-awareness of the effect your behavior has had on others. Remember, you must gauge your behavior as offensive, not necessarily by your perspective, but of those that you offended. This is truly a sobering experience and one you'll need time to process. Talk with your counselor, sponsor, or mentors in the program about the experience. Keep your priorities in place. Amends is a catalyst for our reconciliation in relationships. This process of amends helps us to begin to negotiate an ongoing relationship where we can coexist in our relationship in the moment. It also brings us to a place where we can embrace the personal relationship we have with utmost respect for those involved. It may seem that some of our amends are trivial, while others may seem overwhelming. It is the willingness to come forward with our accountability that is the measurable force. Many of our amends will be directed towards close family and friends. The people we hurt most were those closest to us. A lot of the time we dumped our emotional wreckage on them. We certainly weren't available to them for their needs. Our words may not mean much to them because they have heard our apologies so many times before. Our measures of amends may be seen in the changes we have made through taking responsibility for our actions, in the interest of being involved in their lives. The loss of communication and trust were two aspects that prevailed in our addictions, and we must make an attempt to build these back into our relationships. Openly talking with them about our emotional needs and listening to theirs is crucial. Walking our talk is the measure for true change. I may have been acting out on my addiction for many years, and a 10-minute amends doesn't make it right. It is through our future actions that we'll show our intentions on truly making change in the relationship. Being available for their support, being at special occasions, birthdays, anniversaries, and so on, is showing true interest in their lives. Our actions in the past shut us off from building relationships with others. Our intent is to build relationships in the positive light of recovery. These aren't just words, it is our actions that count. Restitution in relationships may be the monetary accountability by paying back the money we borrowed from family and friends, or to taking care of our legal issues that we had been putting off. We are changing the attitude that I will deal with it when they catch me. We are growing into respectable, responsible partners to those around us as part of our recovery. Some of the restitution is legal, recognizing that an obligation to take care of our past wreckage which may require legal counsel. Working with a sponsor, counselor, and others in 12-step recovery, I have seen countless individuals who lived in the shadows of addiction coming forward and becoming productive members of society. Restitution for behaviors is always part of our actions in the 9th step, because we are building back our sense of value in our relationships with others. Through this method, we gain humility for our actions. Restitution may mean commitment and financial reimbursement. We may have gotten into enormous debt that had in itself kept us feeling overwhelmed and immobilized us to do anything about it. We may need financial guidance from professionals to resolve this issue. We may have had years of not paying our bills, letting them go until they shut off the lights. Our restitution is learning how to live within our means and being financially accountable to others. As part of our amends, we make contact with our debtors and make a financial plan to take care of our bills. We may have to maintain a tight budget. We may have a large portion of our checks taken out due to divorce or child support. Our attitudes about those responsibilities also has to change as part of our personal recovery. Yes, it hurts financially and it weighs heavily on our minds. We must do our best and not let it become another prison to us. Our attitude in recovery is essential for our outlook on our life to be positive. We are taking responsibility for our actions, which is demonstrated by the changes we continue within our newfound life in recovery. Possibly one of the most beneficial forms of restitution is building hope back into our lives again. Living without the chains of addiction allows us to become part of society again, and our continued actions build positive karma in our lives. In circumstances where our amends may hurt someone else, it often is better to talk with a sponsor or counselor to come up with an indirect amends, ones that will give the person sufficient satisfaction that they have made amends, but ones also that will not further traumatize the victim. I was sponsoring a man who just completed his 8th step. Without talking to me, and while he was in an inpatient facility, he went home on pass and knocked on the door of his parents' neighbor. He introduced himself as being in recovery. He had also heard that his neighbor was also on a 12-step program. The neighbor congratulated him on being in recovery and told him he would be glad to take him to a meeting sometime. He then told the man that he was there to present an amends. He said that he broke into his neighbor's house 4 years before and stole some of his guns. The neighbor called the police and had him arrested. He ended up serving 2.5 years in prison as a result of that amends, and he blamed 12-step programs as his predicament. I reminded him that he was informed to let his sponsor review the amends before he acted on them, and he hadn't done that. If I were informed of the circumstance, I probably would have discussed making an indirect amends. Perhaps it would have been better to complete the amends by figuring out what the guns were worth and slipping the money underneath the neighbor's door. Another part of the amends could have been to talk to others who their houses had been broken into and gain insight into the violation. In finding out what it felt like to them, he would have gained a better understanding of the impact his behavior had on his neighbor. In other circumstances where we had a resentment towards someone who ridiculed them behind their backs, the harm it caused was real, but for us bringing it to their attention would harm them. Indirect amends would be more appropriate by stopping the behavior and showing a more positive interaction with others. It still is important to follow through in the process of making amends on our side when trying to make amends in a relationship involving an individual who has died or is unavailable to make amends. Some ways of making amends to a person who has died is by discussing what happened with a counselor, writing out what happened, and even going to the gravesite. Some people have written amends and then attached it to a helium balloon and then sent it skyward. Others have decided to present their amends to loved ones of the deceased. There may be people we injured who we didn't know and have no way of contacting them for direct amends. We may call this indirect amends for our actions. One example is that there were people that were harmed by my actions I had not personally known. I was a street kid in a major city, with my priority being my alcohol and substance abuse over any other relationships. I participated in doing volunteer work at community agencies and nonprofit programs for many years, and still do. This type of restitution can be healing to a community and to the individual. Indirect amends can come in other forms by showing love and unconditional support for others in the community. There may be people on our list that have moved to another part of the country. If face-to-face isn't possible, we can simply get a hold of them by phone or internet. Preferably, it would be better to have some type of dialogue with them. Keep an open attitude and make the effort to make amends if they become available. The effort to deal with the harm we caused others in the past brings us to a place of freedom from unrealistic expectations in our present relationships. We have dealt with the water under the bridge. Now we are ready to set sail on it. We have placed the burden of responsibility on our own shoulders, which shows credibility and strength in our relationships with others. We have changed our liabilities into assets. We are able to affirm our value and others in unconditional relationships today. What this does is give the recovering person the opportunity to come to a point of acceptance for his or her part in the interaction, and then lets that person move on with grace. We have addressed making amends due to our controlling behaviors. It is essential to address how to make amends to ourselves due to being victims in our lives. Yes, we were hurt by others and by our own behavior in the past. Now I want to point out it is making amends to ourselves, not to the perpetrator who has offended us. By doing this, we are not allowing them back into our lives to perpetrate us again. We are reconciling our relationships with others through this step, to allow ourselves to heal and move on. Our mission in Step 9, in dealing with our victimization, is about allowing us to heal our emotional wounds, which we have covered through the use of our addictions. The amends that we are making here is to ourselves. Depending on the circumstances, contact with the offender may not be necessary, unless we have a continued relationship with him or her. In those circumstances, it is about setting boundaries with the offender in our life, so not to be a continued source of victimization. We can change our relationship with the controller offender to an unconditional relationship in recovery. We often can change our relationship with the controller offender to an unconditional relationship in recovery. Processing this decision should be done with a counselor or a sponsor. The pain and turmoil that have been left in the wounds needs to be cleaned to allow to heal. First, we must feel safe to begin this process. We surround ourselves with the healing relationships we find in the rooms of recovery, our sponsors and counselors and loved ones. We address each issue individually and look through deep introspection what the message was left in the wound within us. Often there was dwindled self-esteem, and often the victim feels that something was taken from them from the offender. This releases us from the prison of silence that is left in our emotional wounds, which were cemented in with shame and dishonor. An example is, in my childhood I was bullied through middle adolescence. I lived with shame about who I was, and it affected my ability to grow. I thought of myself as stupid and useless, which was instilled by the offenders who had perpetrated me. I found in recovery that I was an intelligent, caring human being. My deep emotional pain that I endured became strength to show me love, care, and compassion for others in recovery. I kept those words that kept me a prisoner and transform them into a deeper appreciation and insight into others and myself. The offender has been given power to control our lives well after the trauma has been left. We clean out the wound and take our power back from the perpetrator in our lives, and then fill our lives with healing activities and thoughts that replace the negative. Once we define what was, we begin the restoration process of ourselves, and we fill our emotional wound with the love and nurturing we have found in recovery. With some scarring being victimized, we may have these memories triggered to occur in our lives. Being involved in counseling may offer the tools to equip the person to restore balance back into their lives. Quite simply, when the past interferes with us living in the present, it's time to seek outside assistance. Other victimizations may include losses in our lives from relationships, careers, chronic pain, physical disabilities, or other factors. Writing out and sharing these as part of our list to a sponsor, counselor, and others in recovery is part of the 9th step. The addict gets stuck behind their grief, not allowing it to pass by using their addiction to numb their pain. The addict gets stuck in their grief, not allowing it to pass by using their addiction to numb their pain. Often in our grief, we find ourselves delving into self-pity. Self-pity could be known as the first stage of grieving. We're experiencing the loss of something or someone in our lives, but we're not able to share it with anyone else. That is why it is called self-pity, or otherwise it would be known as self-grieving. The issue is the person cannot come to acceptance of the loss without processing the grief with someone else. Similar to using pallbearers at a funeral, we need a handful of people to assist us in letting go of our loss. By processing these areas in our life with other people, we come to acceptance. For example, through sharing our grief with others, we get beyond our pain and find joy in our loved one's memory. Another example is a person with chronic pain or physical disability. By sharing their losses with others, it brings them to a place of acceptance. Through sharing with others, they can effectively chart a new direction with hope. It is, however, important to recognize that grieving over a loss has a beginning, middle, and end to the process. Often you may find a person sharing their pain once and then shutting down the process, expecting themselves to move on. It takes a person time to transition through the stages of coming to terms with their grief. When working with the Apache Nation, they would visit the gravesite of family members once a week for a year as part of their traditions. In being a victim of circumstance which was perpetuated by our addictions, it is necessary to make amends to those we had harmed due to our actions. We lived in our addictions, alienated those that loved us, or projecting the lack of satisfaction in our lives onto them. In making amends, we recognize the pain we inflicted onto others was not warranted. We may not have seen ourselves as being offenders, but the only way we can be set free from our addictions is to set free those that were affected. The methods and approaches to making those amends were listed earlier in this chapter. The addict and the isolated binger character defect must recognize the impact their behavior has had on others. Both victimization of themselves and others has occurred from their isolation. A big part of their amends is willingness to get involved in their relationships with others. This effort can trigger anxiety for some because of the isolation they lived in. Certainly, direct amends is still an important part of this process. For example, a family member may live with the dread out of fear of potential harm that their alcoholic addict could be facing, because there is no contact from them. In other cases, the concealment of their addictions brings forth the need for honesty about their severity. In some cases, the concealment of their addictions brings forth the need for honesty about its severity. Let's not forget to write about hurting ourselves. But the question then is, what nurturing behaviors can I construct to making amends to myself? It totally depends on the individual. We make restitution to ourselves through nurturing care and loving attention, and we begin to heal. Certainly lessening the expectations of ourselves as part of the restitution. I have seen some people take time for self-care simply through going to a dentist, joining a health club, listening to their favorite music, or reading a book for their enjoyment. It may be going back to school or taking time out for a hobby that I haven't allowed for myself. It could simply be taking time out to play Sudoku when I have a few minutes. Changing the rigid expectations we've had for ourselves can only occur with self-nurturing behaviors and by nurturing relationships with others. People who have victim patterns in their lives tend to feel guilty about taking time out for themselves. For those who always have to be busy doing something, because if they don't, they feel guilty, it is about taking time to find things that they can place in their lives that bring them joy. It is important to give themselves the gift of life full of rewards, which can build a self-nurturing life. We have to learn to fill time with activities that bring us joy, and not just ways of killing time. Setting up activities and schedules that help us to be productive is necessary for amends to occur, because part of amends is learning to live another way. We should fill our calendars with activities which we can participate in that support recovery. Then stick to it. Get out there in the action. To starting a social life, begin by simply going out for a coffee with somebody from a 12-step meeting. We call it the meeting after the meeting. What this effort in making amends does is put our talk into action. Our recovery becomes solidified in reckoning with our past relationships. This process brings home a true belief that our recovery isn't just a choice. It is a path for personal interaction with others. Step 9 takes us out of a self-centered world into a world shared by others. This act of humility brings us closer to others and brings us to an image of who we are today, which we can embrace. Building relationships with others in recovery builds self-esteem back into our lives. We walk away from this step with a ton of less guilt and resentment towards others. We shed these garments for a new image of ourselves, being more mature, caring, and loving individual.